Chapter 19. As they settled into the grand dining hall, the scent of rich roast meats and delicate pastries filled the air. The polished silver cutlery gleamed under the light of the chandeliers, and the soft clink of crystal glasses created a peaceful harmony with the ambient hum of the evening. The Duke and Ezekiel took their places at the long table, with the Duke commanding the seat at the head, while Seraphina sat beside him at his right hand, as was customary for the lady of the house. Ezekiel quietly began to serve himself, the familiar comfort of home settling around him. It wasn't until the first round of courses had been served that the Duke spoke, his voice cutting through the gentle murmur of conversation. "Seraphina, you would not believe what transpired at the debutante ball," Duke Alpheus began, his voice rich with a mix of disbelief and curiosity. Seraphina's sharp eyes turned to her husband. "I'm listening." Ezekiel glanced at his father before meeting his mother's gaze. "The Emperor," he said, his tone thoughtful. "Not only did he escort Princess Athanasia, but he danced with her as well." The entire ballroom was watching. Seraphina's eyes widened slightly. "The Emperor? Dancing with her?" Her voice held mild surprise, but there was a certain coolness to her tone. "I suppose it was only a matter of time." Ezekiel shrugged. Rumors of the Emperor's affection for Athanasia have circulated for years, but no one ever confirmed it, not until that night. When he danced with her, it was like the entire court finally saw what we've all heard whispers of. They were shocked, yes, but not entirely caught off guard. After all, the Emperor has always been especially fond of Athanasia. His affection for her is no secret. The Duke leaned forward slightly, his expression contemplative. "It is interesting," he murmured. "We approached him after the dance. We introduced Jeanette, hoping for at least some recognition of her lineage. But he didn't seem to care. He brushed her aside, all while focusing entirely on Athanasia." Seraphina's gaze remained steady, her lips tightening slightly. "I wasn't surprised," she said, her voice cool and measured. "Jeanette's mother was chased out of the palace years ago. The Emperor may not wish to acknowledge Jeanette, no matter her bloodline." Ezekiel frowned. "But why wouldn't he even acknowledge her? She's his blood, albeit from a different relationship." The Duke crossed his arms, his voice heavy with the weight of their conversation. "It seems the Emperor has no interest in acknowledging Jeanette as part of his immediate legacy. He's clearly chosen his path with Athanasia. Jeanette's bloodline, despite its nobility, doesn't seem to hold the same weight." Seraphina's tone remained unwavering. "It was always unlikely. The Emperor has his favorites, and Jeanette doesn't fit his vision. He never did right by her mother, and it seems he has no intention of doing so by her either." Ezekiel let out a frustrated sigh. Seraphina's gaze softened slightly, but there was no sympathy in her voice. "We cannot ignore the reality. The Emperor's focus has always been on Athanasia, and Jeanette was never a part of his plans." The Duke's lips pressed together in thought. "For now, we observe. If the Emperor continues to place all his focus on Athanasia, we may need to reconsider our support for Jeanette." Ezekiel nodded slowly, though doubt lingered in his eyes. The conversation shifted as the meal continued. Seraphina's skepticism toward Jeanette was evident, and the family was forced to face the reality that the Emperor's affection for Athanasia complicated their plans. They would have to adapt and find another path forward. Ezekiel sat in the grand study of the Alpheus estate, his small hands folded neatly on his lap as he watched his father and mother in quiet contemplation. He was young, but not so young that he didn't understand whispers, the murmurs that drifted through the halls of noble estates like lingering ghosts. The name Judith had been uttered more frequently as of late, often in hushed tones, as if speaking it too loudly would summon something terrible. And at the center of those whispers was Jeanette. He turned his golden gaze to his father, Duke Alpheus, who was nursing a glass of deep red wine, the candlelight flickering against its surface. His mother, the Duchess, sat beside him, composed as ever, though there was a coolness to her expression that betrayed her discontent. "What happened?" Ezekiel finally asked, his voice soft but certain. "Why does the Emperor hate Jeanette's mother?" And why does he act like Jeanette doesn't exist? The room fell into a momentary silence. The Duchess exhaled sharply, barely concealing her disdain. The Duke, on the other hand, merely swirled his wine, watching it with an almost thoughtful expression before finally setting the glass down. "You ask dangerous questions, Ezekiel," the Duke said, his voice steady, unreadable. "But I suppose you're old enough to hear the truth, or at least, the version of it that the world knows." Ezekiel straightened. The Duke leaned back in his chair, his eyes settling on the fireplace as he began. House Judith was once a family of great ambition. Unlike many noble houses that rose through military might or old bloodlines, the Judiths built their power through strategy, through calculated marriages, and through alliances made in shadowed corners. They were not warriors, nor scholars. They were politicians in the cruelest sense of the word. Ezekiel listened intently, absorbing every word. Their ultimate ambition was not to rule, but to stand beside the one who did, the Duke continued. And they nearly succeeded. He glanced at his wife, who remained silent, her lips pressed together in displeasure, before returning his attention to Ezekiel. Penelope Judith, the youngest daughter of that house, was engaged to the second prince, Claude de Alger-Obelia. He was never meant to be emperor. No one believed he would be. Ezekiel frowned. Then what happened? The Duke's expression darkened. The first prince, the heir to the throne, was murdered. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle, before he continued. And the man who committed the crime was none other than Prince Claude. Ezekiel felt a chill run down his spine. No one saw it coming. The empire was thrown into chaos. And the Judiths, rather than fear the bloodshed, celebrated it. After all, their future son-in-law had just ascended to the throne. The Duchess scoffed under her breath. They were fools. The Duke gave a slow nod of agreement. Yes, they were. But they were also blind to something far more dangerous than an ambitious prince, the emperor's wrath. Ezekiel leaned forward, hanging on his father's words. No one knows exactly what happened behind the closed doors of the palace, the Duke admitted. But what we do know is that Penelope Judith, the woman who should have become empress, fled. She ran from the palace, from the empire's greatest throne, and disappeared without a trace. The Duchess's voice was sharp as she added, and the Judiths hated her for it. She had everything they wanted, everything they had planned for, and she threw it all away. Ezekiel's brows furrowed. But why did she run? If she was supposed to be empress, wouldn't she have been safe? The Duke's gaze sharpened. That's the question, isn't it? He murmured. Some say she was afraid of the emperor. That she had seen something, known something, that made her fear for her life. Others say she betrayed him, the Duchess added, her tone clipped. That she did something to enrage him so deeply that he not only let her run, but wanted her gone. Ezekiel frowned. No one knows? No one knows, the Duke confirmed, his voice dropping lower. And no one asks. Because the moment she disappeared, the emperor erased her. Her name was struck from every record, as if she had never existed. No one in the palace speaks of her. No one remembers her. Ezekiel swallowed. And Jeanette? He asked. The Duke exhaled through his nose. 9 months after Penelope's disappearance, she gave birth to Jeanette in some forgotten corner of the empire. She died in childbirth. Alone. Unwanted. His expression was unreadable, but something lurked behind his eyes, something that made Ezekiel uneasy. The Judiths did not mourn her, the Duchess said coldly. In fact, they cursed her. To them, she had ruined everything. And her child? She was a burden, not a legacy. Ezekiel looked down at his hands, his mind struggling to piece it all together. The Duke nodded. Jeanette is a ghost of a woman who was meant to be his empress. Whether he hates her or simply does not care, the result is the same. Jeanette does not exist in his eyes. The empire sees her as nothing, because he sees her as nothing. Ezekiel felt an unfamiliar heaviness settle in his chest. He had never really thought about it before, why Jeanette was treated the way she was. Why the emperor never acknowledged her. Why she was always left on the sidelines, lingering like a shadow that no one wished to confront. So that's all she is? Ezekiel asked softly. A mistake? The Duke's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. Perhaps. But even mistakes can be useful. Ezekiel shivered. He wasn't sure if his father's words were meant to comfort him or warn him. In the grand tea room of the Alpheus estate, a sunlit chamber overlooking the vast gardens. The afternoon air is filled with the scent of fresh tea and delicate pastries, the kind his mother always favored. Ezekiel and the Duchess seated across from him, the Duchess stirred her tea with graceful precision, her sharp eyes watching her son with quiet amusement. She had always been an elegant woman, possessing both the refined air of nobility and the keen mind of someone who had navigated the treacherous waters of high society for years. You've spent quite some time in the capital now, Ezekiel, she mused, setting her cup down with a soft clink. Surely, you must have met a young lady who has caught your eye? Ezekiel, who had been content to enjoy the peaceful afternoon in silence, sighed internally. He should have expected this. I'm not particularly concerned with that at the moment, Mother, he replied, reaching for his own cup. There are more pressing matters to consider. His mother merely arched a delicate brow. More pressing than securing your future? You are 17, Ezekiel. It is only natural for you to begin considering marriage. You are the heir to the Alpheus family. It would be wise to find a suitable match before expectations are forced upon you. Ezekiel resisted the urge to roll his eyes. His mother was never one to push unnecessarily, but when she did broach a subject, she always did so with intention. I've met plenty of young ladies, he admitted, but none that I feel strongly enough about to bring home. The Duchess hummed thoughtfully, studying her son with an unreadable expression. And what of Lady Jeanette? At that, Ezekiel hesitated. His mother took notice immediately. She is not acknowledged by the emperor, the Duchess continued smoothly, taking another sip of her tea. Nor does House Judith seem to claim her. If anything, they pretend she does not exist at all. A child without a proper house or standing, you do realize what that means, don't you? Ezekiel set down his cup, his expression carefully neutral. She is still the emperor's daughter. By blood alone, his mother countered. But blood does not always equate to recognition, my dear. And in the emperor's eyes, she is as good as a stranger. She tilted her head slightly. I simply wonder if you are aware of what this means for her future, and yours. Ezekiel was quiet for a moment. He had never given deep thought to Jeanette's future, nor had he ever considered what role he might play in it. She had always been kind, always smiling, always eager to please. But the truth remained, she was alone in that palace. The Duchess watched him carefully before offering a small smile. I am not telling you to wed her, Ezekiel. I only ask that you are not blind to your own feelings, whatever they may be. Ezekiel frowned slightly. And if I fancy someone else? His mother's lips curled in amusement. Then bring her here, she said simply. Whoever she may be, I would like to meet the young woman who has caught my son's interest. Ezekiel exhaled, leaning back slightly in his chair. You make it sound as if I've already made a decision. The Duchess chuckled softly. Perhaps you have, and you simply have yet to realize it. Ezekiel said nothing, only glancing toward the window, his thoughts once again drifting to the capital. Like, comment and subscribe to be notified for updates in the series.